I retired from the Midland Police Department. I was in Midland for 23 years as a law enforcement. I retired at the rank of lieutenant. I do believe in the death penalty. I don't have a problem with it. I'm not sure it's the right decision that the jury made in this particular case.
I wanted to help Clinton. I said, because I didn't think that he deserved to die for something that he didn't do.
I was the bailiff for Judge John Hyde for 11 years. I do believe in the death penalty, I always have, but I think the execution should be set off as far as the date, and that information should be looked at pretty strongly. I don't think he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
I usually would keep my mouth shut about things like this, but in this circumstance, I don't feel like it's fair, and I think that's an injustice for somebody to die and not be, at least try to find the truth out.
He definitely don't deserve to be on death row. I know that. It's messed up what they done to him.
I was never provided any evidence that, in my mind, spoke to the fact that Clint Young, and only Clint Young, could have been the one to kill Mr. Petrie.
It was 2003 when a Midland jury sentenced 18-year-old Clinton Lee Young to death. His conviction was questionable from the outset, hinging on testimony from the other three suspects who were present during the crimes. They pointed the finger at Clint Young in exchange for generous plea deals on their own criminal charges or for kid glove treatment by authorities. One of those suspects, David Page, provided the key testimony that put Clint Young on death row. But new scientific evidence and sworn witness statements show Clint Young is innocent of that crime. 4 witnesses have come forward saying they heard David Page confess that he shot and killed Samuel Petrie and framed Clint, all so that he could escape a death sentence himself. New ballistics evidence, analyzed by a nationally recognized crime lab, leaves little doubt that David Page shot and killed Mr. Petrie. The key evidence was a pair of gloves found in the dirt at the murder scene. Clint described to police how David Page wore those gloves to shoot Mr. Petrie, then threw them into the dirt. At trial, the state's own testing found David Page's DNA was inside the gloves. Clint Young's was not. The crime lab tested those gloves in August 2017 and found extensive gunshot residue, showing that they were indeed worn to shoot a gun. And only Page could have worn those gloves. All this leads to only one conclusion: David Page was the shooter. In the 14 years since trial, it has become clear that Clint Young was telling the truth all along. How Clinton Young ended up with these 3 men on that November night in 2001, and how he came to be on death row, is a story of a prosecution's rush to judgment, tainted evidence, and a childhood scarred by trauma. When Clinton Lee Young was born on July 18, 1983, his mother was 18 years old and suffering in a violent and turbulent marriage.
His dad was abusive, verbally, physically, mentally. It was hard and it was horrible. At one point, we fought over Clint. At one point, he took him, wouldn't let me have him back. I wanted to run away and leave them all. I wanted to pack my bags and just be gone, But you don't. You stay and make it work. Try to make it work.
With a child's boundless resiliency, Clint did his best to make the most of a broken home life.
Clint's messy room.
I better know how you do it. My name is
Clint stumbled along in his childhood, hoping for stability and happiness, but the reality was darker.
Yeah, I remember one day he came home from school, got a call from the school and from being in trouble, doing something, class clown type stuff. And his dad called him outside and was like, hey, we need to talk, and just started wailing on him with a 2x4. Yeah, just brutally attacking him and just hitting him and hitting him and hitting him. You could hear it cracking, the 2x4 cracking, literally. And he was 13. Head, face, body, everything. All the reason. He wasn't aiming, he was just he was just swinging, just straight belligerent, drunk swinging. There's a difference between a tough life and a miserable life. And yeah, he was a horror story. Yeah, I've seen horror stories with better endings.
His older stepsister also recalls their father's alcoholic rages.
We'd be driving down the road, and he would tell the boys, get out, we're going to fight like men, and they'd be 12 years old. I seen him kick them with boots and, things like that, with steel-toe boots on, just taking his anger out on whoever was there, whoever was the easiest target. My brothers were scared of him.
Clint was passed back and forth from his father to his stepfather, also an alcoholic.
Don't do that. It's your costume.
Over time, the violence took its toll.
Either trauma or neglect will have a detrimental effect on a person's development, but you put them together and it just compounds the limitations and makes them even more severe. There are several assessments of Clint as he's growing up around age 9, 10, 11, 13. You get the sense that he was doing his best to adjust to the norms of society to the extent that he could discern what they were, because they weren't being subscribed to by his immediate family and the people he was most often in contact with. But there were repeatedly factors that were getting in the way and dragging him down.
In his teens, living with his father, Clint's downward spiral accelerated. At 13, he began drinking and taking drugs. His father, absorbed in his own addiction, did nothing to stop him.
There's research that's really central to the world of trauma psychology called the adverse childhood experiences. And these are 10 factors that were identified in research that were related to a large range of both psychological and physical impairments in adulthood. The more of these 10 factors that someone had in their background, the more likely they were to be anxious, to have PTSD, to be depressed, to have attempted suicide, to have had psychotic episodes, to have abused drugs. Clint is among the way less than 1% of people who have all 10 factors in their background.
At 14, he was arrested and sent to the Waco Center for Youth. From there, he was sent to a facility run by the now disbanded Texas Youth Commission, essentially a prison for teenage boys. From age 15 through 17, Clint struggled to survive in the violent world of the Texas Youth Commission. He was targeted in part because he didn't fit the part of the hardened offenders he was locked away with. When he was finally released from the juvenile centers, he worked to build a life for himself.
He would get up in the morning and make his bed, enrolled him in college, got him a car. He had a job. I was doing great.
But brutal attacks in youth prison had left Clint traumatized and jumpy around groups of people. Unable to adjust to college life, he dropped out and tried to earn his own living. He worked washing dishes and installing carpets.
I think, again, Clint was doing his best to function as well as he could given the circumstances. He tried to go to community college. He was trying to live a respectable, functional life, but he was doing it with his hands tied behind his back, in effect.
He fell prey to methamphetamine, a drug which was abundant in East Texas and similar to the stimulant medications he had been given at TYC. By his 18th birthday, Clint had fallen in with a new group of drug users and petty criminals. One of those criminals, David Page, would change the course of his life forever.
I've been here since 2003. I was 19 when I came to death row. I was 18 when I got the case, right? So.
And you're now?
30.
30.
Yeah, I just turned 30 in July. It's kind of a depressing milestone.
I would have said congratulations, but it's not really.
That's what I'm saying. It was kind of a depressing milestone. I mean, at one point I didn't think I was going to make it to 30. Mm-hmm. You know, and now that I made it, it's like, well, I've spent all my 20s on death row, so.
I can't give up. I can't give up. Even if he doesn't come out, that he'll be in general population where I can at least hug him again.
It was 2 days after Thanksgiving 2001 when Clint Young headed out to party with a new group of friends who all shared a singular interest: getting high. David Page, Mark Ray, and Darnell McCoy were meth users who had known each other for years. Clint Young was a newcomer to the group. Barely 18, he had a swagger, but was impressionable and scared, driven by the need to belong.
I guarantee you it was the people he was hanging around with. None of them really were his age. We were all probably about 10 years his senior. So, you know, he was a kid walking in adult shoes, and he was playing with some big people, you know, that were pretty strong set on how their life already went.
He just struck me as somebody, because in that world down there in Ore City at the Fisherman's Motel, you didn't find goodness in people.
At the ramshackle Fisherman's Motel in East Texas, cabins were taken over by meth addicts and other drug users. One of them was Doyle Douglas. A local drug addict, Douglas would gladly loan out his car for a baggie of dope. And dope is what Page and the others were looking for on that November night in 2001. They set out with Douglas for a drug run in Douglas's car, but they never made that score. According to the prosecution, Douglas was shot in the head at a drug house as he sat inside his car. They alleged that Clint shot Douglas in the head with a .22 semi-automatic while sitting to his right in the front passenger seat. Then, they claimed, Clint held them at gunpoint, even though at least two of them held loaded guns themselves. All the physical evidence is in conflict with the suspects' claims, even directly contradicting their stories. Forensic evidence suggested Douglas was not shot at close range, as would be expected if he were shot inside a car. A ballistics expert has concluded that Douglas's shooter likely stood much farther away, such as outside the car, where witnesses placed David Page. After the shooting, David Page and the others drove Douglas to a wooded area to finish the job. David Page says Douglas was still alive when they dumped his body.
Yeah, we pulled him out the trunk.
Was he alive?
Still
He was still alive?
Still moaning. So I don't know if it was just the air left in the lungs and whenever we pulled him out, or if he was, but even if he was still alive and you lay him face down in a creek, he's gonna drown. That's, as a lot of people say, that's common sense. Why the last 2 shots were unnecessary, in my opinion.
But who shot them?
Mark.
All the witnesses have testified that it was indeed Mark Ray who was the last to shoot Douglas. Even Ray himself confessed that this was true.
First, you stated that Clint took the final shots, right?
No.
In your first statement?
Oh yeah, in the first statement, yes, ma'am.
Why did you do that?
I was trying to save Mark. I got told that.
Because you were friends.
Right. I've known Mark a lot longer than I've known Clint. It's like I told the investigators, first 2 investigators, I was trying to save Mark.
I think it's really hard to believe that someone lies in court to protect his friend and will not lie to protect his own life. What assures me that you're not saving your own life right now? What assures me that you're telling the truth?
Well, the only people that know the truth is me and Clint.
A second shooting the next day resulted in the death of a Midland grandfather who was buying groceries at the market. It was Clint's conviction for this second murder that put him on death row. But new evidence shows, far beyond reasonable doubt, that he did not commit that second murder.
Samuel Petrie is shot. Okay, he's not somebody that did anything or harmed anybody in any kind of way. I was like, this is an innocent person. This isn't a gang member. This isn't a dude that's involved in a drug trade. This is a man that was going to a store to get some food for his family. That took a toll on me. Because I'm like, man, this dude's done told me about having a family. I mean, this is the type of man that I was raised to respect.
I talked to inmates that overheard Page either directly or indirectly say that he in fact was the shooter in Mr. Petrie's death.
Those new witnesses who spent time with Page in jail over the course of a decade have gone on the record that they heard Page brag repeatedly that he himself kidnapped and shot and killed Samuel Petrie and got away with it.
David was talking to this guy from another gang. I heard him say this. He said he had shot this man, Petrie. They kidnapped him, and they brought him over here to Midland from East Texas somewhere. And that he had shot him, he had murdered him, and had dumped him in some oil field. He admitted to killing somebody. That was pretty big.
I mean, the dude, David Page, told 100%. David Page told me he was wearing gloves. That's why he didn't have no gun residue on his hands. He told me all sorts. He said a bunch of stuff he shouldn't have said. Where they did it, at a pump jack on a lease road. I mean, he told us everything.
A third Midland inmate, John Hutchinson, in a sworn statement, also recalled hearing Page boast about how he had murdered Petrie. A fourth inmate, Russell Studeville, also heard Page's jailhouse confessions.
He talked to a lot of people about his case, which I kind of felt was odd, But from what I gathered was that he was hiding something. At least try to find the truth out instead of just, no, okay, he did it, close the book, Let's find out what happened.
I said, look, I didn't kill that old man. You take my DNA, take my blood, take my hair samples, test them gloves. I didn't kill that dude. And they didn't know what gloves I was talking about. So we sat there and argued about the gloves. Finally, they go back out to the crime scene and found them. And I told them that there would be gunshot residue on the outside of the glove.
That pair of gloves, found near Mr. Petrie's body at the crime scene, has now become crucial evidence implicating David Page. David Page admits the gloves were his and that he bought them just hours before Mr. Petrie was killed. Fiber analysis confirms the gloves were new at the time of the shooting. Forensics experts found David Page's DNA inside the gloves, but not Clint Young's. And the crime lab found extensive gunshot residue inside the fibers of both gloves, indicating that they were worn to shoot a gun. The evidence leads to only one conclusion. Clint Young could not have been the shooter. It was David Page. David Page continues to insist that he did not shoot and kill Mr. Petrie. When he took a lie detector test in 2001, however, he failed it. Page has changed his version of the story time after time. Today he admits that he fabricated many of the damaging statements he made at trial about Clint Young. Page has never given a credible description of how Mr. Petrie was shot. Page also claimed Clint intimidated him into helping kidnap Mr. Petrie. But again and again, Page was left alone with Mr. Petrie and did nothing to escape. In one instance, an outside security camera at a 7-Eleven store showed Clint going into the 7-Eleven, leaving Page alone with Mr. Petrie in the truck for 11 minutes, and did nothing to escape or to free Mr. Petrie.
Why don't you get out of the car? If the keys are in the car, why don't you start the car and get somewhere? Or, better yet, get out of the car and go holler at somebody, get some help. Why wouldn't you do that?
I think that given so many opportunities for David Page to escape, that at most point he was a willing participant in whatever was going on at that time, including the kidnapping of Mr. Petrie.
At trial, the prosecution claimed the 7-Eleven videotape had been lost, so Clint's jury never saw it. The loss of the video was so unusual that the trial judge himself personally asked investigator Jeff Marug to locate the tape, but it was gone.
You do your job and you do it right, and you don't take shortcuts. Somebody took a shortcut somewhere, I guess, because we have a piece of evidence that's missing.
To this day, Marug is still bothered by Clint's death sentence.
During my law enforcement career, we had a number of capital murder cases go through. To my knowledge, Clinton Young was the first man sentenced to death by a Midland County jury in at least a couple of decades, if ever. Frankly, I'm surprised the jury sentenced Clinton to death. I can see that they would give him a sentence something like Page or even life, but I was surprised at the death sentence on this one. I really was.
Deputy Ronald Bearden, the court bailiff who sat through Clint's entire trial, also has doubts about Clint's sentence and even about the guilty verdict.
I've always felt bad about Clinton. During that 11 years, I probably handled approximately over 1,000 criminal defendants, and out of those over 1,000 defendants, Clinton Young would probably be in the top 10% as far as people that were respectful, and I had no problems with, and that I came to like and to have conversations with. I don't think he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of murdering Mr. Petrie.
To convict Clint, the state staked its case on David Page's shifting testimony secretly offering Page and other witnesses favorable treatment in their own criminal cases.
David Page said something about how they made a deal, a plea agreement, that if David Page testified, he'd get 30 years, and that Clint Young would get the death penalty. He told me, he said his lawyer made a deal with the district attorney that if he testified, that they would guarantee him that he wouldn't get no more than 30 years, and that he would be out in 15.
So, I mean, if you have a plea deal, I guess he rode with it. He took his way out. But, you know, it's one thing to have a plea deal and take your way out, but to also drag somebody, you know, down with you.
Page now admits his best chance at getting a favorable plea agreement for himself was to demonize Clinton Young.
For one of the first laws in life, self-preservation. Okay, I'm not going to do something to put myself in jeopardy, much less my family.
David Page received his end of the deal. In 2016, he was up for parole after only 13 years. He's up for parole again next year. As for Clint Young, he received a death sentence with an execution date of October 26, 2017.
Is there anything you want the victim's family to know about you?
I mean, I didn't kill their loved one. The thing is, I didn't do it. Killing me is not justice. You know, especially while the dude that done it is sat around bragging about getting away with it. I mean, they deserve better. If the system's designed for them, which it is, then they deserve better than that. I mean, at the end of the day, they deserve to know who really took their loved one's life and why.